Have you ever tried fasting and quit halfway, feeling hungry, irritable, and without any real transformation? Or maybe you've never fasted because you think it's something extreme, reserved only for spiritual leaders of the past. What if I told you that the fasting practiced by John Wesley was not a mystical ritual nor an act of self-punishment, but a strategic tool for spiritual growth, discipline, and inner strength? Today you will understand not only how he fasted, but why it shaped his character, strengthened his faith, and impacted thousands of lives. And by the end, you'll have practical clarity on how to apply this principle in your own walk. John Wesley did not see fasting as optional. For him, it was a normal part of serious Christian life. He believed that certain spiritual disciplines were means of grace, instruments through which God works in the human heart. And among these means, fasting held an important place, not as a bargaining tool with God, but as a tool for inner alignment. Wesley fasted regularly on Wednesdays and Fridays, a practice he inherited from the early Christian tradition. He did not fast only during crises. He fasted as a constant discipline. This already teaches us something powerful. He did not treat fasting as an emotional response, but as a structured habit. Now pause and think. Most people only seek spiritual intensity when facing a problem. Wesley sought spiritual depth before problems even arose. He understood that discipline precedes power. But how exactly did he fast? Typically, Wesley abstained from food until 3 in the afternoon. It was not a prolonged absolute fast of several days repeated often. It was regular, consistent, and sustainable. He believed that consistency was more formative than occasional extreme acts. This breaks a common misconception that spirituality needs to be dramatic to be deep. Wesley's fasting was always connected to prayer. He didn't simply skip meals. He replaced mealtime with intentional seeking of God. He read scripture, prayed with focus, examined his heart. Fasting was a catalyst for spiritual attention. And here's something that could change your perspective. Wesley did not fast to convince God to act. He fasted to align his own heart with God's will. This difference is enormous. Many enter fasting with a bargaining mindset. If I fast, God will do this or that. Wesley understood that God is already gracious. Fasting does not change God, fasting changes you. He believed fasting weakens disordered impulses and strengthens self-control. He viewed the body not as an enemy, but as something that needed discipline to cooperate with spiritual life. He understood that unchecked physical desires influence moral decisions. So fasting was training to say no to immediate appetite, training to endure discomfort, training to remember that humans do not live by bread alone. Now imagine applying this today. We live in an era of instant gratification, fast food, quick responses, constant entertainment. Fasting confronts exactly this mindset. It slows you down, and it exposes hidden dependencies. It reveals how much we are governed by impulses. Wesley used fasting as a tool for humility. He knew that spiritual leadership without inner discipline produces hypocrisy. He preached to crowds, organized Methodist societies, watched the movement grow, but never abandoned the basic practices. And here's an important question. Do you want the results Wesley had without the discipline he practiced? He also encouraged other leaders to fast. Records show that he did not ordain those in ministry who completely neglected this practice. For him, it demonstrated a lack of spiritual seriousness. But beware, Wesley never taught that fasting saves. He taught that fasting cooperates with sanctifying grace. He always maintained the balance between discipline and grace. The power was not in deprivation itself, but in the dependence it cultivated. Now let's bring this to something extremely practical. If you want to fast like Wesley, start with moderate regularity. Choose a fixed day each week. Set a clear time. Replace mealtime with focused Bible reading and prayer. Use this period to examine specific areas of your life. Ask, where do I need more self-control? Where have I been governed by desires? Where is my spiritual life lukewarm? Fasting amplifies spiritual awareness. It brings to the surface concerns often drowned out by routine. But there is something even deeper. Wesley saw fasting as part of the pursuit of practical holiness. For him, true faith always produces concrete transformation. Fasting was not isolated. He combined it with charity, service to others, scripture study, and accountability within the community. This is essential to understand. If someone fasts but remains indifferent to the suffering of others, something is disconnected. Wesley believed inner discipline should produce outward love. And here we reach the climax of this first part. John Wesley's fasting was not about impressing people. It was about forming invisible character. It was about strengthening the inner man so that the outer life would align. You don't need to start with extremes. You need to start with decision. A decision that your faith will not be superficial. A decision that spiritual discipline will not be theory only. A decision that growth requires practice. In the next part, we will go even deeper. We will talk about the spiritual effects Wesley experienced through fasting, how he handled physical weakness during the practice, which mistakes to avoid, and how to structure a consistent plan inspired by his model. But before continuing, I want to challenge you. If you feel you need to develop more spiritual discipline, write in the comments, "I want to grow in self-control." Leave your like so more people can discover that true spirituality involves practice, not just intention. And subscribe to the channel, because we will dive even deeper into the spiritual dimension of fasting according to John Wesley. Now you need to see fasting not as an isolated act, but as part of a carefully constructed spiritual architecture. Because when we say John Wesley fasted on Wednesdays and Fridays, it may sound like simple historical information, but it's not. It reveals a mindset. It reveals a man who understood that spiritual growth does not happen by chance, but by disciplined intention. Wesley lived in a context of spiritual coldness in 18th century England. Formal churches, cultural Christianity, little practical transformation. And he realized something that remains true today. When faith loses intensity, spiritual disciplines are the first to be neglected. And when disciplines are abandoned, faith becomes superficial. He did not accept this. Even being extremely busy, traveling thousands of miles on horseback, preaching multiple times a day, organizing Methodist societies, writing letters and sermons, he maintained his fasting days. This already challenges us deeply, because if anyone had excuses to neglect spiritual discipline, it was him. But he understood that precisely because he was exposed to so much responsibility, he needed even more inner structure. And here's something almost no one talks about. Wesley did not fast only when he felt like it. He fasted even when he lacked enthusiasm. This breaks the modern idea that spiritual discipline depends on emotional motivation. For him, consistency mattered more than emotion. How many times have you skipped prayer, reading, or seeking God because you didn't feel like it? Wesley would say that it is exactly on those days that discipline becomes most valuable. But let's go even deeper. For Wesley, fasting had three clear purposes: to humble the heart, strengthen self-control, and intensify prayer. He believed the human heart naturally leans toward pride, and fasting, by exposing physical weakness, reminded one of total dependence on God. When the body feels hunger, you perceive your limits. You remember you are not self-sufficient. Wesley saw this as an opportunity for brokenness, not useless suffering. Furthermore, he associated fasting with intercession. Many of his fasting days were directed toward specific causes: spiritual revival, conversion of people, guidance for important decisions. He did not fast vaguely. He fasted with focus. And here is a powerful practical application. If you are going to fast, have a clear purpose. Don't enter fasting just because it's spiritual. Define a focus: personal growth, breaking a habit, seeking direction, or interceding for someone. Focus generates intensity. But there is another fundamental aspect of Wesley's fasting that must be understood with maturity. He never taught that fasting replaces obedience. He never placed discipline above grace. He knew someone could fast and still remain spiritually proud. That's why he constantly warned against legalism. He fought two extremes, neglect and spiritual pride. On one side, people who completely ignored spiritual disciplines. On the other, people who practiced them to feel superior. Wesley rejected both. He taught that true fasting produces visible humility. If someone fasts and becomes more critical, rigid or arrogant, something is wrong. And this is extremely relevant today, because it's possible to turn fasting into religious performance. Wesley understood that the value of discipline is not in outward appearance, but in internal transformation. Now imagine the cumulative impact of this over the years. A man who fasts twice a week, replacing meals with prayer and heart examination for decades. This is not an isolated event. This is continuous character formation. It's no surprise that he had such moral clarity. It's no surprise that he faced persecution with firmness. It's no surprise that he maintained an intense ministry rhythm well into old age. Discipline builds endurance, and here's something you may never have connected. Fasting strengthens the ability to say no. When you learn to say no to something legitimate, like food for a spiritual purpose, you strengthen the inner muscle that says no to illegitimate temptations. Wesley saw a direct connection between bodily discipline and moral stability. He understood that the soul and body are interconnected. Spirituality is not just mental, it's integrated. This means fasting is not punishment for the body. It is training the body to cooperate with the spirit. But let's go even deeper. Wesley also lived in a disciplined community. He participated in and led small groups where there was real accountability, direct questions, mutual examination, confession of failures. Fasting did not happen in isolation from community life. It was part of a collective spiritual culture. This reveals something essential. Individual discipline is strengthened when there is a healthy collective environment. Perhaps you struggle to maintain consistency because you're trying to do everything alone. Wesley structured a system where people encouraged each other toward holiness. Now think about this scenario. You decide to fast once a week for 3 months. You use that time for specific prayer. You write reflections. You evaluate your spiritual progress. You share with a mature believer. You observe areas of growth and areas of resistance. Do you think you would remain the same? Fasting exposes hidden anxieties. It exposes emotional dependencies. It exposes impulses. And when these come to the surface, you have the opportunity to address them with God. But there's an important warning. Wesley was also prudent. He did not encourage practices that harmed health irresponsibly. His fasting was structured, moderate, and sustainable. He understood physical limits. Discipline is not imprudence. This is essential to repeat. Mature spirituality respects the body's limits. The focus was never extreme suffering. It was meaningful consistency. And now we reach a decisive point. If you admire John Wesley's spiritual depth, you need to understand that it did not arise from inspiration alone. It arose from repeated practice. We live seeking spiritual shortcuts, but Wesley built depth with years of faithfulness in small disciplines. And perhaps what's missing in your spiritual life is not more content. Perhaps it's more consistency. Imagine 6 months from now looking back and realizing your prayer life has deepened. Your sensitivity to sin has increased. Your self-control has grown. And your spiritual clarity has sharpened. Not from fleeting emotion, but from structured practice. This is the legacy of fasting in Wesley's life. He did not fast to create movement. He fasted to keep his heart aligned. And here is the question that closes this part. Are you willing to give up temporary comfort to gain lasting depth? Because that is the essence of fasting according to Wesley. But before moving forward, I want you to make a public decision. If you want to develop consistent spiritual discipline, write now in the comments, I choose discipline with purpose. Leave your like so more people understand that deep faith requires real practice. And subscribe to the channel, because we will turn theory into a concrete plan that you can start applying as soon as next week. Now I need you to imagine yourself 1 year from now. Not 1 week from now. Not 1 month. 1 year living a constant, silent, and deep discipline inspired by John Wesley's practice. Imagine that you decided not to treat fasting as an occasional spiritual event, but as part of the structure of your life. What would have changed? Would your mind be clearer? Your impulses more controlled? Your spiritual sensitivity sharper? This is exactly where part 3 begins. Because now we're not just talking about what Wesley did, but what this practice produced in him over the years. Wesley did not build spiritual depth in moments of euphoria. He built depth in secret. He fasted when no one was watching. He maintained his Wednesdays and Fridays not to impress, but to align his heart. And this is decisive, because the true test of fasting is not what happens externally, but what is formed internally. What did fasting do inside him? First, it refined intentions. When you remove food, something curious happens. The body complains. The mind begins to negotiate. You realize how accustomed you are to immediate gratification. And in this process, you start seeing other areas of life where you also act impulsively. Wesley understood this. He knew fasting revealed the anatomy of desire. And here's something profound. Fasting does not create spiritual weakness. It reveals weakness that was already there. It simply exposes it. When Wesley felt irritation during fasting, he did not blame the practice. He examined his heart. When he noticed distraction, he adjusted focus. Fasting was a mirror, and mirrors do not lie. Second, fasting strengthened convictions. Because when you learn to say no to something legitimate for a greater purpose, you train your will. And a trained will is essential for any serious spiritual growth. Wesley faced persecution, severe criticism, rejection within the church, and even physical threats. Do you think that sustains itself without inner discipline? Fasting helped form emotional and spiritual stability. Third, fasting expanded awareness of grace. It may seem contradictory, but it's not. When the body feels need, the soul perceives dependence. Wesley never taught that fasting earned merit before God. On the contrary, he insisted that all discipline should remind us that we totally depend on grace. Fasting for him was a physical reminder of spiritual need. Now I want to organize this into an extremely practical plan, inspired by his model, but adaptable to your reality. First, clear decision. Do not start on emotional impulse after watching this video. Decide on a fixed day of the week. Wesley chose Wednesday and Friday. You can start with one. Strength lies in regularity, not quantity. Second, conscious preparation. The night before, adjust your mind. Don't treat it like an ordinary day. Define a specific focus. It could be growth in self-control. It could be guidance for decisions. It could be intercession for someone. Fasting without focus becomes mere abstinence. Third, balanced execution. Determine the period. Wesley often fasted until 3 in the afternoon. You can adapt according to your physical condition. During the time you would normally eat, replace it with prayer and Bible reading. Do not use this time for social media. Do not replace food with digital distraction. Replace it with intentional seeking. Fourth, deep examination. Ask hard questions. Where am I spiritually complacent? Which habits need confronting? What has God already shown me that I've ignored? Write down your answers. Clarity generates progress. Fifth, conscious closure. When you break the fast, do so with gratitude. Pray again. Evaluate what you noticed. Fasting does not end when you eat. It ends when you apply what you have learned. Now I need to talk about common mistakes, because many give up because of them. Mistake number 1, starting too radically. Wesley was consistent for decades because he practiced sustainably. If you start with extremes, you will likely quit quickly. Mistake number 2, turning fasting into a spiritual competition. If you start measuring spirituality by hours without eating, you have missed the point. Mistake number 3, ignoring physical limits. Discipline must never be imprudent. If there are health conditions, adjust wisely. Mistake number 4, expecting mystical experiences every time. Not every fast will be emotionally intense. Many will be silent, and it is in repeated silence that formation occurs. Now let's reach the deepest point of this part. Wesley's fasting was part of a bigger vision, practical holiness. He believed true Christianity transforms behavior, priorities, and character. Fasting was a cog within a larger system of grace, prayer, scripture, and community. If you isolate fasting, it loses power. If you integrate it with Bible reading, accountability, and service to others, it gains power. Imagine a routine where once a week you interrupt the automatic cycle of life, interrupt constant consumption, interrupt rush, interrupt stimuli, and dedicate hours to reflection and prayer. This reprograms your inner life. And here is the final climax. You do not fast to prove strength. You fast to acknowledge dependence. You do not fast to manipulate God. You fast to align your will with His. You do not fast to appear spiritual. You fast to be shaped in secret. This is how John Wesley built depth that sustained an entire spiritual movement, not only through fiery sermons, but through invisible disciplines. And now the decisive question is not whether fasting works. The question is, are you willing to practice it consistently? Because knowledge without practice does not transform. If you have come this far, do not let this series end as mere historical information. Make a concrete decision. Choose a day. Define a focus. Start in a balanced way. Persevere for a few months. Observe what changes, and then come back and share your experience. Write in the comments now, I choose depth in secret. Leave your like so more people discover that true faith requires real discipline. And subscribe to the channel, because upcoming content will continue exploring spiritual practices that shaped men and women who marked history. Because in the end, the difference between admiration and transformation is consistent practice.